Hello, guys and gals, me Mudahar, and ladies and gentlemen, about a week ago I said, it's time for you to fight back. It's too late. Well, we actually did end up fighting back, and seems like there have been some real positive things going on. So, for anybody that doesn't know, I talked about something known as chat control about a week ago. I've been talking about computer privacy and your safety for probably months now, and I know while it might be tiring for some people, this is an incredibly important topic for me because I've noticed that in 2025, things have accelerated to a point that the internet that we saw a year ago is substantially different than where it's headed to now, where almost every single site you want to go to requires you to have identification. There's a lot of cyber attacks going on that have people's identifications leaked out for the world to grab. And really, it makes it seem like most of the internet that we go to will require you to have some form of ID requirement, all because parents refuse to actually parent their goddamn children in an appropriate manner. But let me get into exactly what's going on. So I talked about something known as chat control, which for anybody that doesn't know what chat control is, it's basically the framework, a legal framework in the EU, where what EU nations want to do, or some want to do, is actually get rid of the encryption and basically have a backdoor in some of the most popular messaging services that we use. So for instance, my buddies just messaged me on Signal, which is an encrypted chatting platform. Now, unless, anybody gets access to one of our phones, gets access to their app, our communications are encrypted, and it's just meant for us in the group chat. That's how it's always been. And I want to say that almost all communications should be done that way. You should always be talking to people with some level of belief that your correspondence is totally private. Nobody can hack into your stuff. Nobody can look through what you're talking about unless they get like a wiretap, like a legal wiretap, like a legal court order, so to speak. So again, ladies and gentlemen, this whole thing is being pitched primarily as a way to protect children from online abuse, so to speak. Now, if you go to websites like Roblox, for instance, Roblox is a platform where they introduce things like facial recognition. So if you're a predator, for instance, right, and you want to talk to a child, you now have to go through extra measures. You have to possibly present IDs, or you have to go through facial verification that determines through an AI if you're over the age of 18, or under the age of 18 in this case. And so obviously with situations like this, even the Roblox community is like, hold on a minute, Preds are getting falsely checked as under 18 because no system is perfect. Predators, hackers can get access to an already verified under 13-year-old account and start going after kids. Predators will know exactly what age group that they're targeting, and kids will use their parents' IDs. That's happened many, many times. And it's actually pretty true in a lot of ways as well. Even Discord, which actually implemented age restriction, like where you have to provide IDs that later ended up getting leaked out for the world to consume and pilfer through, primarily from Australia. Yeah, it turns out in order to bypass the actual facial verification, and I've never done this myself, but they used a game known as Death Stranding 2, which has some pretty godly looking visuals. And by using the in-game photo feature where you could move facial movements, you could make the character smile, be angry, yada yada yada. They had convinced the actual artificial intelligence that apparently this image of Sam Bridges from Death Stranding 2 was actually a real guy, because I guess the graphics were so good they were determined to be in an adult age group. They bypassed the age verification, so kids could get access to mature platforms. Now, remember, even in countries like China, for instance, a lot of children, in fact, according to the Beijing News over here, 58.5% of, children aged 8 to 18, which is, 1,156 respondents, admitted to giving their personal information to their children for real name authentication in online games. So this is where parents in China are giving kids their IDs to play online. You might be like, why do they do that? Well, it's because in China they have like enforced time limits. So for instance, kids can only play like, I think an hour, maybe 2 hours per day, or maybe less. Sometimes it depends. They get more freedom in the weekends as opposed to the weekdays. But parents are like, yeah, fuck it, here, take my ID. It's not like they're going to restrict the adults. So even if the parent wasn't giving their ID to their kid, nothing stops the kid from going to mommy's purse or daddy's wallet, probably when they're sleeping or doing something else, digging out their identification, slapping that shit into an age verification, putting it back into the wallet, and moving along. This is how easy it is to bypass age verification. They are taking our IDs simply because Let's be honest, it's just a way for them to track where we're going to. That's the issue that I have with digital ID requirements like this, because I feel the internet's headed to a place where all anonymity is gone. Look, up until this point, you can absolutely browse the internet with anonymity. Even if you can say, oh, my ISP tracks me, nothing stops you from getting Mulvad VPN, slapping it on, and then using it to silently browse the internet, because according to your internet service provider, they'll just be seeing garbled data, and Mulvad doesn't actually store your information. I mean, they've been fucking raided because of it. So the thing about all of this, ladies and gentlemen, is that you can absolutely retain your privacy. But when every site requires you to whip out your wallet, give them your digital identification or your ID card, well, all of a sudden there's a repository of what websites you go to. Now, those websites could be porn websites, those websites could be gaming websites, those could be any social media websites. Basically, your profile is basically tracked through your actual identification. So whatever anonymity you think you had is completely gone. And again, it's sure, you can say that, but we're stopping bad people through it. Well, what about people that live in areas where they really do need their anonymity? What about dissidents to oppressive regimes? What about journalists? What about, somebody that just wants their privacy? Because look, at the end of the day, the people that are exempt from this shit are the politicians, the fucking elite, the goddamn law enforcement. Like, they're allowed to do whatever the fuck they want. It's crazy shit. I was looking somewhere in like California, like cops were like armed with like MP7s and stuff, and I'm like, damn, it's crazy. It's like the cops can have all the fun toys. Lord forbid you try to legally purchase one for your own, like, shooting gallery pleasure. Not at all. So anyways, kids do violate this. Kids do find ways around this. And I'll explain it to you like this. Back when I was a kid, accessing a website like mini clips was usually not something we could do in our school libraries, right? So back in the day, if you entered mini clips into an address bar, you would get it blocked. The school would have like a little block, right? They would just say, this website is not allowed. So back in the day when we were younger, we literally just did this in school. We opened up the Windows XP terminal, and we basically just sent a ping request to miniclips or miniclip.com. We stopped it. We dug out the IP address right over here. This might seem crazy, but back when we were kids, we found ways around to play our favorite video games. We opened up the IP address, and it would take us to miniclips. So yeah, in order to play Snow Fight 3D in school, we had to go through those extra steps. Basically, the point of me saying this is because kids are not dumb, okay? A lot of kids, especially in the tech-savvy world of today, will find ways around the system. Really, if you want kids to be safe, you have to be good parents. You have to sit down and talk with your kids. When I was younger, my parents, we had our family computer out pretty much in the open, like in the living room. And, it might sound weird to you nowadays, but I didn't really get a computer or a laptop in my room until I probably touched the 9th, 10th grade at this point. And, when it came to smartphones, I ended up getting like a Galaxy S3, probably around the time when I actually started going to like university, right? Like once I had left high school, once I just basically went to like the mobile store myself, paid for it with my own cash, my own actual driver's ID at the time. Now, the thing is, obviously kids nowadays, they get access to smartphones fucking when they're like 12 now, when they're like 11. I mean, I've seen it with my aunt. She's given her children smartphones, computers, tablets, so on and so forth. So a lot of these kids do have unfettered access, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if you're a parent, you should sit down, talk to your kids about this. By the time I ended up actually getting these devices, I was too old to get groomed off on the internet. At that point, I had already learned through school and my parents not to meet up with random people. I mean, back in the day when we had PictoChat on our fucking DS, we had news stories telling us, hey, listen, don't talk to Randys on PictoChat and follow them outside the mall. It's wrong. So it really, in my opinion, it requires good fucking parenting. It does not require the government to take away our privacy and our rights, simply because some people are just dog shit fucking parents. Simple as that. Okay, if you're gonna fuck the shit out of somebody and 9 months later, have a kid, okay, you should be prepared to take care of your child. All right, simple as that. I think if you give your kids unfettered access to the internet, in some ways, that's almost child abuse to me, okay? Because or not abuse, neglect, like willing child neglect, because you're not paying attention to what they're doing. All right, like you're giving them these toys and gadgets, okay? Kids are you're buying them for your kids. It's not like kids are digging up money to buy brand new iPhones and tablets and gaming computers. If you're giving them money to do this, if you're giving them access to this, you also should be there as a parent. But anyways, that's the spiel aside. To go back to chat verification or chat control, there's actually a bit of a win. You probably noticed in the news that the EU backed away from this. So I want to kind of go into this and tell you exactly what the win is, because there is a win. But like many tyrannical governments and evil law enforcement agencies, they want to always end up having their way. So let's get into it. So now they've all managed to somewhat agree that they're going to focus on risk assessments for online services, voluntary protective measures by providers, mostly the people that are serving these things like Meta, like Microsoft, like Google, and a new EU agency, the Transitional Regulation. So providers must check whether their services can be misused for the dissemination of abuse material or for contacting children. There are to be 3 categories, so you got high, medium, and low risk. Providers in the highest category could be obliged to participate in the development of risk mitigation technologies, the most extreme forms of, age verification and whatnot. In principle, providers are to provide reporting functions for users and control options for shared content. National authorities are to be empowered to oblige companies to remove and block content, and for search engines, it should be possible to remove objectionable entries from the result. Now, in a lot of ways, people have looked at this kind of as a way of censorship. Now, look, how do you define what is inappropriate for a child? For me, it's a pretty hard line thing. Obviously, pornography is a no-no, but is every single discussion of anything sexual, anything political, anything of that nature always bad? There's always exceptions to this where you can teach people about sensitive topics without it jumping into the aura of adult material. There's a way to cover mature topics, and unfortunately, when it comes to the discussion, governments are fickle. Sometimes a government can decide this is not appropriate for children, or that isn't appropriate for children. And sometimes they'll have a good justification, but more often than not, the justification is usually thinly veiled to issue some form of censorship. Maybe they don't want people talking about certain topics, so they make it adult only. So you have to go through an extra barrier, share your IDs, and then when you're discussing topics like that, you're usually discussing it on places that have you ID tagged. Again, censorship, any form of monitoring, mass surveillance should never be tolerated in any civilized society. If you give up on this now, you almost jump into the lion's den with nations like North Korea, nations like Iran, where their own residents have issues expressing who they are and what their actual beliefs are, okay? You cannot be a subservient person to the state. You have to at least retain some level of your own individuality. So when it comes to what voluntary scanning is, this is a little bit different. Under the current rules, companies can voluntarily scan for CSAM without violating privacy laws. That exemption was set to expire in April 2026. So after a series of abrupt turns in their negotiations, the member states now back a text that removes mandatory scanning requirements. So it sounds good. Instead, the focus shifted to strengthened risk assessment and mitigation for online service providers. Platforms will have to evaluate how their services could be misused. Now, somebody that I think is a really good voice for this, somebody that has been talking about this pretty much since its inception, is Patrick Breyer, who's discussed how this stuff isn't necessarily even a win, too. So when he talked about this, right, he said that this vote is not a retreat, but actually a green light for indiscriminate mass surveillance. So the way that he brings it up is this is the 3 dangers of that voluntary deal, right? Where you start putting more of the emphasis on the people distributing this stuff. The reality is it's not just about finding known illegal images. So what the chat scanning does is it wants to look through chat messages and it wants to look if images that are being sent consist of known hashes that are detected in CSAM material. And if these hashes get found through machine learning or artificial intelligence systems, then law enforcement is brought in. Now, importantly enough, what you have to understand about the story is that it is voluntary. It is what they're going to be pushing. Instead of mandatory, it's voluntary. And again, what's voluntary today may just become mandatory down the road when the infrastructure is far more developed. So, for instance, my understanding of this law means that for platforms like Discord or Meta or anything, they'll have to assess how much their platform could be used to communicate with children or to spread illegal images of certain children. And at this moment in time, they'll have to voluntarily scan their services. So regardless of it, it might be a bit of a win now, but ultimately it still needs to be argued, and these things still need to be sort of hashed out, no pun intended, just so that, down the road, the actual voluntary scanning of our messaging services don't just go beyond trying to protect the children, which again, mass surveillance is mostly for reading what the average person posts, basically filtering these things through AI and gathering a whole bunch of information that the scope of what the government actually wants to do. Now, whether using something like photo DNA will be enough, which from what I understand is what platforms like Discord currently use, is going to be one thing. But I imagine that this is going to be the start. Once the camel's face is in the tent, it just keeps going further and further from there. Again, I'm not so much opposed, obviously, to government or corporate warfare against evil things like child exploitation. You just can't. Children are still, unfortunately, going to be harmed. You just cannot give up your complete user privacy in the goal of trying to protect these children. Again, these regions of the world can put effort towards the protection of children. They just don't have to get rid of encryption and enable a wave of mass surveillance in the process, which ultimately, to me, that's more important than, well, the government ever really protecting children to begin with. Now remember, this is not perfect. Remember, these are AIs and algorithms, and according to Patrick, a lot of these algorithms are notoriously unreliable. For instance, the German feds warned that 50% of all reports generated under the current voluntary scheme are criminally irrelevant. So remember, an AI doesn't have context or understanding. If it calls you a pedophile, it's because it's somewhere in its programming, it connected 2-3 words or an image and immediately labeled you as one of the worst things anybody can be labeled. Now, is it true? If a human being could look at that and go, okay, no, this isn't true. There's a lot of difference, right? I showed you in the last time I discussed this, sometimes there are people that take photos of their kids so they can send them to doctors, and those people end up getting fingered by an artificial intelligence. And then it ruins their life for damn near months, if not years, because they have to spend so much time trying to discuss with not just the big tech company that has flagged them, but also law enforcement agencies as well. Unfortunately, this happens. Now, there are reasons why law enforcement wants to jump down into this. There is a serious problem with CSAM material, and not to glorify or teach you how to do this, but the way that it works is a lot of people locally generate a lot of illegal material now in their system. Look, ever since we had AI-generated images and videos, a lot of people have been using local models in order to generate some material. So for instance, this image of a woman dressed like she was from an aristocratic, almost Victorian era, this is an image generated by somebody who used a local model. They combine this even at times with things like LoRa's, which are smaller models that assist, these big AI generation models. Now, obviously, if you look at, again, the prompts, this is just somebody saying, hey, generate me a woman, pretty elegant green dress. And of course, the negative prompts always just come out to bad anatomy, bad hands, multiple eyebrows, yada, yada, yada. Now, this is a, image of just somebody dressed up. It's something that ChatGPT would have made you. What ChatGPT and a lot of these services don't let you do is they don't let you make illegal images. So if you upload an image of yourself and ask ChatGPT, hey, take the clothes off, ChatGPT or most frontier services will go and say, no, that's not okay. Actually, that's bad. And they'll probably flag you for something down the road, as they should. But the thing is, with local models, anybody can download something and have it generate images locally on a system, and no surveillance system will be able to detect that. Unless, of course, deep inside certain operating systems, they have built-in checks like Apple, I believe, did for a little bit with iOS, where periodically it would check hashes on your photos, and I believe it would report that back to Apple. I don't know if the system is still active, but generally a lot of disgusting people can generate illegal images. So for me, first off, I hate all AI-generated art to begin with. I think it's all dog shit. But I also think that I think 100% of AI-generated pornography, of real people, of fucking fictional characters, is always illegal. If no human being consented to it, even if their images are in a model, you have basically used their images non-consensually to make naked images of themselves. It's one of the most disgusting things that I've seen. People with uncensored models are able to generate illegal images of not just adult women, but tons of children. And it's really bad to the point where, you've had people, like, for instance, you may not know the story about an individual known as Ryan Colmo, who was somebody that was literally walking around Orlando, Florida, Disneyland. Now, this person was just taking videos and photos. And normally you would be like, oh, probably just a vlogger or something. Maybe, whatever, who gives a shit? But the photos that he was taking of were children walking around this park. And he would take the images of these children and basically use a lot of these, local AI generated models, something that he would find on websites floating around, maybe on the dark web, download them and use them in freely available tools. And he would generate at least 85,000 images of children, 845 videos, and 8,500 images. Not only is this incredibly fucking illegal and disgusting, but unfortunately, the grim reality is on places like the dark web, on places like, encrypted chatting platforms, unfortunately like Signal or Telegram, people are sharing these images. And that's one of the things that is being used as the reason for pushing chat control. Because this situation is just growing. It's just evolving over time. And the reality of it is that there are ways to fight against this. Like, for instance, I asked my local artificial intelligence tool to help me look into the situation itself. And it brought up actual updates, and it brought up how the system is. And of course, even in July 2024, they talked about, they just keep seeing year over year increases in this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it gets more and more severe. And unfortunately, it would not just stop at the dark web, it would also show up on the clear web itself. So according to one of the reports from 2023, 20,000 images were found to have been posted with just one forum, one dark web forum out there. And unfortunately, as much as I love to talk about the deep web, the grim reality of it is that this stuff has existed around. But the thing is, scanning the average person is never going to be the cure for all of it. Because for the really disgusting few out there, they're already on platforms that aren't even going to be affected by chat control to begin with. For a lot of people who are, in this disgusting sphere, they're not usually the ones that are sharing the stuff, even on places like Signal to begin with. Generally, I would say most of the user bases for a lot of messaging applications, not just Signal, but even iMessage, are just legal, honest individuals. And by giving law enforcement and governments the ability to scan our information, even if it is to honorably fight something as disgusting as what I just showed you, is never okay, because it just opens up the gateway for abuse. Remember, back in the day, the FBI had programs like Carnivore, where they would implement, again, taps inside actual data centers, ISPs, where they would just monitor and grab megabytes at the time. A megabyte back in the day used to be a lot. Just grabbed emails upon emails and just read whatever they felt like it. And look, there are laws we have in place, even if you're going up against the mob, right? You probably have seen a lot of mob movies, TV shows. There are things called wiretaps, and you go through courts. You actually get wiretaps approved. If you know that somebody is a criminal, you go to a court, you get a surveillance approved by the court, and the surveillance is usually very, very, very descriptive on what you can and cannot do. So for instance, if you're going to wiretap somebody's phone, you can only listen to conversations that are germane to the criminal activity that you suspect them of. If they start talking about things that are outside the scope of criminal activity, then your wiretap isn't necessarily, from my understanding, valid. But we're reaching a point where government agencies, and again, the government itself or law enforcement, just wants to look through every single thing that we have. We're at a point where, look, our individual privacy is already completely at risk, but the tiny bit of communication that we have between each other is now open for, again, governments like this to look through. And the thing that, again, burns me is that they can look through our shit. We can't look back, okay? It's rules literally for thee, but not for me. And again, look, at the end of the day, I wanted to show you, the reason why this video is long is because I don't want to be a channel that takes one side and doesn't give you the whole story. There's a reason why this technology is being pushed so hard, and there's an altruistic reason why it's being pushed. But that one reason, and I'll give you the raw reality of it, they want to, just under the guise of protecting children, specifically still target you for your information on a mass scale. This is, in my opinion, mostly used for mass surveillance, more so than it ever is about protecting the kids. Because if you're going to protect those kids, they already have systems in place. They're already working on systems like artificial intelligences that are countering the detection, using synthetic methods to counter the synthetic shit that is created on a day-to-day basis. But, ladies and gentlemen, ultimately the end. While there's a slight win now, I guarantee you, if you don't keep fighting, they're just going to come back with another draft in the EU that pushes for this shit. And if it works in the EU, You bet your ass it's going to come to the US, it's going to come to Canada, it's going to come to other parts of the world. Eventually, we will, if we give up, live in a society where there will be no privacy, there will be nothing but mass surveillance. There will be nothing but the ability that we will have to live in constant fear and subjugation that Big Brother is watching at any given moment. But again, ladies and gentlemen, that's just what I wanted to talk about. It's an interesting topic to me. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.